Fantastic. Thank you so much for staying with me to this part of our program. Okay? So let's take a look and see what we've talked about so far. So we talked about what ethics was. We desperately went searching for some sort of framework that we could use, some pre-established set of standards that would help us to make better ethical decisions. The result of that is we didn't really find anything out there that we could hang our hat on. We then spent some time taking a look at the real-world types of situations that engineers find themselves in when they're called upon to make ethical decisions. Okay, we found out that first off, they're incredibly boring. They're not glamorous. They're not exciting. They're not hair-raising in the least. Instead, what they are is engineers in the course of doing their normal, everyday job encounter situations that they detect as being wrong. And then all of a sudden, they have a professional obligation to look into the situation and see if they can fix it. Not a problem whatsoever. So look, we're engineers. We should be able to solve this ethics problem. Okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to build an ethical framework that you can use to make better decisions. Come along with me and let's see how we're going to put this together. Remember, when you read the paper, you see people going to jail all the time. Recently, Galleon Group founder Raj was charged by the U.S. Department of Justice with doing insider trading. So how did this go down? So first off, Raj was fantastically wealthy. He was like the 236th richest person in the United States. By the way, that makes him a billionaire. Okay? And he was sent to prison for doing $60 million worth of insider trading. To me and to you, $60 million is a lot. To Raj, it's a rounding error. So this is just silliness. So what was he doing? Well, Raj had gone to the Wharton School of Business. And when he was in school there, he had classmates. And his classmates had gone on to work at companies like IBM and Intel. So what Raj would do is he'd pick up the phone and he'd call them up and say, hey, remember what a great time we had back in school? And they'd say, yeah. And then he'd follow that up with, hey, you're getting ready to release your quarterly earnings report. What are you going to be saying? And they'd tell him. Then using that information, hey, it was a good quarter, it was a bad quarter, he would either buy or sell stocks ahead of the market. By the way, in case you're wondering, completely illegal. Raj is now in jail for a considerable period of time. All right, so we need a framework for making better ethical decisions. So right off the bat, I think we can all agree, for any framework, the very first thing that has to be there is we have to be able to recognize that a decision that we're being asked to make is an ethical issue. Okay? Oh, that makes something unethical. So I decide what to have for lunch. I decide what to wear to school, what to wear to work. I decide what type of paper to use. Are those ethical decisions? No, they're not. Those are just run-of-the-mill decisions. Okay? What makes something an ethical decision is whether or not the decision or the situation could be damaging to somebody or a particular group. Okay? Once again, use that gut of yours. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that you're trying to choose from? Or maybe a whole bunch of good things, or a whole bunch of bad things. If so, you're clearly looking at an ethical decision. Is this issue more about what's legal, or is it more about what's most efficient? And if so, how? Okay. If it falls into the category of being an ethical issue, then bam, you know you need to bring your ethical decision-making skills to focus on it. Case study for you. Okay, so you have a former employee and she was fired for basically doing poor quality work. But good news, she's a good person. The reason she was doing poor quality work is because she had a drinking problem. Okay? All right, so stuff happens and stuff like that. Well, she reaches out, it's been time has gone by since she left the firm. She reaches out and gives you a call. She says, hey, look, I really need a job. Okay, and she does. She's a single parent, she's got 3 children, all that sort of stuff like that. She's asking you to give a good recommendation for her to the other company that she's applying for. Oh, by the way, if it wouldn't be too much to ask, could you perhaps just not mention the drinking problem thing? Okay? Oh, and by the way, could you also say, by the way, she does really good work. Okay? She said, don't sweat the drinking thing. Got it under control. A lot has changed since I left your firm. That was one of the things. I 12-step program, do all everything. I don't even touch it anymore. I'm good. Okay? And as long if they ask, if you'd be so kind as to mention, she voluntarily left your company. She wasn't fired. She was voluntarily left. There was family health issues. She had to leave. She had to go take care of somebody, and now she's getting ready to get back into the workplace, and you were basically very pleased with the work that she did. Well, you think she's a good worker. You've seen her actually do good work as long as she's not drinking. You know, it's really hard to stop drinking. You don't really think she's necessarily overcome her drinking problem, okay? Arguably, if she came back to work at your company, you would not hire her. Question, should you give her a good reference? Mother of 3, desperately needs a job, looks like you're in the driver's seat here. There's no harm to you. She's not working for your company. Oh, that's a tricky one. What a mess. I mean, you'd be lying. I mean, you could, careful. I see exactly where you're going on this one. You're going to give her a good recommendation, but you're going to talk around the issues, right? You're not going to mention why she left. I don't know. She was here one day, she wasn't one day. You're just going to skip over all the bad stuff, talk about the good and positive stuff, and you're just not going to mention or bring up the other stuff. Okay, you know, that's one approach. Where do you think that lies ethically? Remember the golden mean? Are you on the good side, bad side? How far off are you? Ethics is tricky stuff. Now, the NSPE Code of Ethics can be applied to all of these situations, okay? You know, on the do's, they say you really ought to be truthful. Don't tell any lies. On the don'ts, they're saying sort of exactly the same thing. So each one of these situations, you can always go to the NSPE Code of Ethics and see if you can pull out of there what relates to your particular situation. Ken Lay was the CEO of Enron. Enron, that massively huge, fantastic company that overnight vanished. Ken Lay was convicted and was on his way to prison prior to dying. What was he convicted of? He was just running the show. Ken got convicted of knowing that Enron was tanking, knowing that the company was getting ready to go down in flames, and at that time telling people everything's fine. Enron has never been stronger. I'm buying Enron, you should be buying Enron. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Ken was selling as much Enron stock as he could possibly sell. When the regulators discovered this, they said, Ken, you've broken the law. You basically traded on insider information. You're going to jail. Okay, ethical framework. So what do we have so far? We understand that an important part of our framework is that you got to recognize an ethical issue. Okay, you got to identify that the decision that you need to make is an ethical decision. Fine. You're going to like this next step. Second step is you need to collect all the facts. Hey, we're engineers. We do a really good job of this. Okay? What are the relevant facts? Do I know everything that I need to know? More importantly, what don't I know? Do I need to do my homework here? Do I have enough information right now to make a decision? Or do I need to go out and get more information? Do I know who this decision is going to impact? Okay? Is everybody going to be impacted the same? Are some people more or less important than others? And if so, why are they more important? Okay? What are my options? When it comes time to make that decision, what are my options? Have I talked with the people who are actually going to be impacted? Okay? Have I really thought this through? Do I have a firm grasp of all the possible things that I could do? Good questions, right? You need to collect all of that data. You can't possibly hope to make a good ethical decision until you have all the information that you need. You've got some legwork to do in this situation. Got an ethics case study for you. Say you're working for a company. Company's going to make some really cool looking t-shirts. Fantastic, wonderful, great. Everybody loves t-shirts, okay? You're going to sell them online. Even better. Where are you going to get your t-shirts from? Okay, got some options. There's a free trade t-shirt company, okay, based out of where else? San Francisco. Makes beautiful shirts, okay? It's going to cost, $26.85, something like that. Total project cost is going to be about $8,000 if you buy your shirts from them. Okay, that's good, no problem. There's another option you got. There's a Chinese T-shirt supplier who can provide the T-shirts to you for about $5.50 a pop. Total cost to you about $1,000. $8,000 versus $1,000. Well, it's done. Going with the Chinese company. Stop. As with all such things in life, there's more to this story than just the price, right? So we know the San Francisco shop does free trade. They pay a valid wage. They've got a very safe and wholesome work environment. So everybody's taken care of in that environment. It's a good job, okay? T-shirts from China, they're cheaper. And oh, by the way, there's a benefit to them being cheaper, right? Cheaper T-shirts means you can do fancier designs. So the product you'd actually get from China would probably sell better online. Okay, that's cool. But unfortunately, we all know, working conditions in China are not that good. They're paying low wages. There's nasty work environments. You're overworking people. Potentially, you're going with kids or underage workers and stuff like that. I mean, you're not going to see any of this. You're not going to China. You're just contracting with this company. But you've heard stories. Who are you going to buy your T-shirts from? Well, once again, this is a situation where you got a very clear yes and no, at least in an ethical point of view. From a business point of view, you probably also have a clear yes and no. It may not line up. It's very interesting, though, because when I presented this case study to multiple college classes, instantly they all went with the China option. I got to confess, I was a little surprised. I thought the kids were going to be a little bit more altruistic, right? Let's make a green earth and all this. Nope, $1,000, bam, we're going with the Chinese shop. Definitely, it's one of your options. Question is, what would you choose? You're going to get T-shirts no matter what. Question is what's it going to cost you? And what's going to cost your psyche when you do it? So if we take a look at the NSPE Code of Ethics, see if we can apply it to this situation. The do's say, make sure that you take care of the world. You got to make sure that you don't do bad things, okay? The don't says its own particular item. You can sort of pull one out from each for every ethical decision that you actually have to make. Another ethics study, Ralph Coffey. Now, Ralph was a manager of a Bear Stearns, by the way, that no longer exists, of a hedge fund, right, of a fund for them. It was completely based on subprime home mortgages. And you know what happened with subprime home mortgages, right? That market tanked. Now, the reason that Ralph Coffey was charged by the government with doing bad things is that he was in charge of this fund, which meant that on a daily basis, he had a chance to look at the fund and know how the fund was doing. As the subprime market started to crater, Ralph looked at it, and when people would come to him and say, Ralph, should I invest in your fund? He'd look at it and he'd go, yes, you should invest in my fund. Things have never been better. Meanwhile, Ralph, who had money in his own fund, was cashing out. Clearly, it's a case of insider trading, and the feds were not amused. The crash of his fund was one of the contributing factors to having Bear Stearns go out of business. All right, let's look at our ethical framework. What do we have so far? We understand that we have to recognize that something is an ethical issue. Step one. Number two, we have to go out and we have to get all the facts. Rock and roll. I think we're on board there. What do we do next? Now we have to evaluate our alternative actions. We know everything we can possibly know about the decision that we're going to have to make. And we pretty much understand what our possibilities are for making decisions. Okay, that's fine. So now we have to carefully look at them and say, listen, what should I do? There's a bunch of different ways, a bunch of different philosophies that we can approach this with. One of them to say is, listen, for each individual decision that I can make, how much good is it going to produce and how much bad is it going to produce? As engineers, we love this one, especially if we can quantify it. Well, that's 10 units of good and 4 units of bad. You can't quite do it that way, okay? But you get the gist of it, right? Another approach is to say, listen, our decisions ultimately impact people. And the question is for all of the decisions that I have to make, what is the impact on people going to be? Am I going to affect more people or less people? The people that I do impact, am I going to make their lives better or worse based on the decision that I'm making? Okay? There's another concept that says, listen, in this grand world in which we live, we should treat all people equally. There's not one group that's better than another group. We are all brothers and sisters. Question, when you make this ethical decision, will you be treating all people equally? Or are you going to end up favoring one group over another? Good question. We exist as part of a community. We are not islands. We belong to families, we belong to companies, we belong to communities, we belong to nations. Of all the options that we have, which one's going to do the most for our community? Which one's going to benefit the most the people who we interact with? And as a final consideration, listen, we all want to become better people. We want to be a better person than we are today. Which one of the decisions that I could make here will contribute to that? Which one's going to move me forward in my plan to become a better person, a more honest person, a more courageous person, more the person that I want to be? Not easy to do, but you do need to take a look at each one of your options and evaluate them arguably against each other. Got a couple case studies for you here. Man, these are like run-of-the-mill stuff. These could show up at any point in time in your career. You're sitting at home, it's just before Christmas holidays, everything's going well, then there's a knock at the door. You go to the door, it's a delivery man. Fantastic, I love it when the delivery man comes before Christmas. He's got a big basket. You say thank you, you take it in, it's got a little card, you pop open the card, surprise. The delivery basket is from one of your vendors. It says, hey, we hope you and your family enjoy these goodies. And let's say it's a really expensive basket. Got some wine in it, got some high-end chocolate in it. Wow, that's looking good. What you going to do with that basket? I mean, it's clear what they're trying to do. They're trying to get on your good side. They invested in this fancy basket to make you think positively of them. Who knows? Maybe they've got a contract sitting in front of you. Now you have a 40-pound basket sitting in your front room. What the heck are you going to do with it? Options. Eat it. Yes, like that one. Option 2, take it into work. Okay. Option 3, what, send it back? Wait, you accepted it. What, are you going to drive it across town, drive it across the country, drop it off? Hey, I can't accept this, thank you. No good options there, but you do need to do something. Sales expenses. Great. So here's the scoop. You're trying to sell something to a company. You're part of a team that's trying to sell. The person who's going to purchase it says, listen, I could buy from you or I can buy from them. I'll tell you what. I'll buy from you if you guys make a donation to my local charity or to my son's soccer team or something. You do something extra, and I'll buy from you. Well, that's not really part of the contract. That seems a little sneaky or underhanded. Should you do that? Does it matter? It's a good question. $200 doesn't mean that much to your company. It's no big deal to you guys. And by the way, it's a contribution to a charity. Your company's charitable and stuff like that. You've got no problems with that. But to get a sale, well, that sort of changes everything, doesn't it? Here's the last one. I like this one especially. So, customer executive from Southeast Asia is going to come over and visit your headquarters. Fantastic. That's good. We'll be able to show them what we do and stuff like that. He's going to meet with your executive team. Now, the person who's setting up this visit takes you aside and says, hey, look, he's coming over. Could you take care of all of his expenses? Okay? There might be some expenses that don't really fit into your company's, hey, we pay for this type of stuff. Go ahead and reimburse him. I will take care of you. You will be made whole. So what are we talking about here? What we're really probably talking about is having this guy go off to a strip club. Let's just be straight about this, okay? He's going to do something that normally your company would not reimburse for. I'm going to bet you that's probably what it is. This guy wants you to then pay for his strip club expenses, but don't worry about it because he's going to reimburse you for it. The guy who's going to visit your headquarters is really important. You want to sell a lot of stuff with or to him. What do you do? That's a tricky one. A lot of different ways to do this. I'll tell you one, and it's a little skunky, and I do apologize for that, but think about it. Look, he's saying that your company should pay for all this stuff, and there's some issues with your company's what they pay for policy. That's one approach. Why not have you personally pay for all this stuff, and then he reimburses you? You could be talking about a lot of cash. Maybe it's a plane ticket, maybe it's hotels, maybe it's all those expenses. I mean, you could be talking about $5,000 or even $10,000 worth of expenses there. But if you ran it across your books and not the company's books, does that remove the ethical decision? It probably does, because you're not violating your issues. You'll pay for him to go to a strip club. You've got no problem. Well, or maybe you don't want to pay for him to go to a strip club. You better work out how you're going to handle this before that executive shows up. Otherwise, you've got all sorts of problems on your hands. Take a look at the NSPE Code of Ethics. Can we find anything that's going to guide us here? Yeah. Well, you got to be a faithful agent for your company. In other words, don't do bad things that your company doesn't want you to do. I think that's a critical factor. There's also a don't associated with that. Okay? So every time that you face with one of these ones, you should take a look at the do's and you should take a look at the don'ts and see if the NSPE Code of Ethics gives you the guidance that you're looking for. Matthew Tannen was another one of those Bear Stearns hedge fund managers. He actually worked with Mr. Coffey. He was in charge of the exact same hedge fund that started to tank. He, too, told people, don't worry, the sky's not falling, everything's fine. We'll be back up and making a profit very soon. Feel free to invest in us. And he knew he was lying. He now has an opportunity to meet with federal officials. All right, ethical framework. We've got 3 things in our framework so far: recognizing an ethical issue, getting the facts, and then evaluating all of our alternative actions. Fantastic. Here comes the 4th part. You need to make a decision, and then you need to test it. Okay? Considering all of these approaches, all of the different options that you have, the big question is, which one of these best addresses the situation that you now find yourself in? Okay, that's a good question, and it's a good question to try and answer. You know, and this is sort of the classic one, right? If I told someone I respect, or even better, if I told a television audience which option I've chosen, what would they say? You know, the classic story is always, you know, if your decision was on the front page of the newspaper, or if your mom found out about the decision that you'd made, how would you feel then? Granted. I mean, I think this is a critical part. You know, before you make the decision, pretend like you've made the decision. Go around and tell people what decision you're planning on making, and then gauge their reaction. A couple of interesting things here. Is it the reaction that you're anticipating? If it is, then great, you got your hand on it. Or is it a completely different reaction, something that you had not anticipated? That happens also. More often than I think we care to admit, right? So we need to keep our eyes open in these situations. If you can get feedback before you commit to an ethical decision, that's fantastic. Hopefully what it's going to do is it's going to confirm that you're in the process of making the right decision. Good stuff. Congratulations. Of the bad decisions, you chose the least worst. Okay? If you get feedback that tells you otherwise, maybe you need to go back and look at your options one more time. I love this one. So, there is a building in downtown New York called the Citicorp Building. Okay? It was built in 1977. It was a very unique set of circumstances that they built it under. There was a Lutheran church, St. Peter's Lutheran Church, that owned the land that Citicorp wanted to use to build their brand new headquarters on. St. Peter's was willing to sell some of their land, but they wanted to keep a church on a corner. Okay? So the architects were tasked with finding a way to build a skyscraper in downtown New York in such a way that an older church could still reside on the property. The solution they came up with was absolutely magnificent. So it's this building, this skyscraper, that's based on 4 stilts. It's incredible. It's a fantastic building, right? Okay, the structural engineering was a gentleman by the name of William Lemercier. Okay? Now, one of the issues that you face whenever you build a skyscraper, by the way, is a problem with winds. When the wind blows and presses up against your skyscraper, it exerts an incredible force. So you need to make sure that your building is going to be strong enough to resist that force. Because of the materials that they used to build the Citicorp Center, it was a really light building. Congratulations, because they didn't want to put too much weight on those stilts, right? But the challenge here is that also meant that the winds could do some serious damage if they pushed on it. They did a most amazing thing for 1977. They installed what's called a tuned mass damper on the top floor. What this is a big block of concrete that floats in a sea of oil. And they can move it left or they can move it right, depending on what the forces of the wind against the building are. So they can counteract the wind forces. I mean, clearly some serious engineering design went into this building. And they were very, very proud of it. Then a young lady who was attending a local university decided to make this building the subject of her master's thesis on how to design skyscrapers. Fantastic. She requested and received copies of all of the architectural drawings and all of the calculations that had gone into making the design decisions. And she sat down and she worked through all of these. What's interesting is that she arrived at a different conclusion than the structural engineers did. She identified one situation that she didn't feel that they had correctly done their calculations. It's called the quarterling wind problem. And what it is they had worked out how the building would react if they had a wind that it would hit straight against one of the faces. What they hadn't correctly calculated was what the building would do if they had a wind that hit straight on an edge and split its force over two surfaces of the building. Now she took this to her teacher. Her teacher said, look, you're a student in my class. I appreciate that. You're a good student. No problems with that. But really, look, professionals design the building. I think you probably just got some bad data or something like that. But she did reach out and she did tell the company, hey, look, I found some problems with your calculations. They said thank you. They didn't really take action. But William eventually heard about this. And William was a good engineer. So he sat down and he reran the numbers. And he discovered he actually did have a problem. It turns out that with a wind that would show up once every 50 years in the city of New York, his building could get knocked over. All right. Now, why? Well, okay. It turns out the way they secured things in the building, they had two choices. They could either use bolts or they could use welds. Now, it turns out that bolts are actually pretty good. Welds are better. But bolts are cheaper. So when they had built this building, they had actually gotten a financial incentive to use bolts. Got signed off. Nobody had any problem with it. It was all good because it all met the structural guidelines. So all the places where metal was joined in this building had been joined with bolts. Great. So the structural design guy, when he realized that he had a problem on his hand, he says that he realized that he was looking at lawsuits, bankruptcy, and effectively, potentially the end of his career. He believed that he had three options before him. He could not say anything, keep his big mouth shut. He could commit suicide, or else he could tell the world about the problem that he had caused. Thankfully, he chose the third option. So what they actually did, it was a pretty amazing story, is they went through the building from place where metal was joined, and they basically welded it shut. So they welded each one of the connections after the building had already been built. It was a huge project, and in the end, it ended up costing $8 million to resolve this issue. But today, the building's solid. That 50-year wind will come along, and it won't cause any problems. From our point of view, we had an engineer who had a problem that was detected. What's interesting, it was detected inside of his company. Nobody was talking about this problem. There was no press, there was no television, there was no bloggers saying, oh, by the way, Citicorp's going to fall down in this first big wind. They were the only ones who knew about it. They could have kept their big mouth shut. Maybe the wind comes, maybe the wind doesn't come, maybe the wind comes long after you've left this world. Whatever. right? And yet they spoke up, even though there was a risk to their reputation and obviously probably a risk to their bottom line also. So these are not easy calls by any stretch of the imagination. I think in this particular case, they did a great job and they did the right thing. So a quick case study here. Okay? So you have a call, you have a client that gives you a call and asks you about a competitor. Okay? Now, you don't know that much about a competitor, but one of your long-term customers has actually dealt with that competitor, and they've said bad things about them. They were not happy with them at all. Question for you. Do you pass that information along to the person who's calling you? You don't actually know it to be true, but you've heard. I mean, we're basically talking about gossip here, aren't we? I don't know. Ethically, are you permitted to pass that along? Gratuities. You know, as engineers, we don't get tipped nearly enough. But look, take this as a context, and you can always take it out of context. You're helping a customer. They've got a big boat. It has to be, you know, taken off a truck and put into the water, or what have you. You and a bunch of other folks are guiding it, structure it, you can get it in. Customer goes, wow, you guys did a fantastic job. Whips out a big chunk of $100 bills and starts handing them out like they're candy. Do you take it? Well, question is does the company actually care about it and stuff like that? Don't know. You would hope that the company has some sort of policy there, right? Conflict of interest issues. As a department manager, you're in charge of setting up a fantastic food buffet for everybody. You got a budget. You got $200 you can spend. Your door gets a knock on it. It's your neighbor who comes over. She says, hey, listen, I'm setting up this brand new food service company. Hey, I heard that you're in charge of this party. I'll tell you what, okay? I'll do it at cost. I'll put in some extra items. Just hire me to do it, because then you'll be like on my reference list. You know, you probably wouldn't have even thought to talk to her if she hadn't spoken up. Do you have a conflict of interest here? All right. And this one's my favorite, because it happens more often than you might know. So you're working at a company. You're locked head-to-head in a battle with the evil Empire company down the street. You guys are both bidding on a particular contract. And then you discover that somebody who works for you has inside information about how the evil Empire is going to bid on this contract. Is it ethical for you to get them to share their secret inside knowledge with you so that you can make a better proposal? You know, it's weird because it's not even your ethical decision, right? They're the ones who's making an ethical decision to share that information with you. If they do choose to share it with you, do you choose to use it? It's like a one-removed ethical decision. Happens actually quite often. So there was a lady by the name of Danielle Chelsea. She was a beauty queen who got involved in the stock market. Now, I'm not sure how much Danielle actually knew about stocks, but Danielle knew people. And Danielle had a Rolodex that was huge. She knew everybody, and everybody knew her. And she was one heck of a sweet talker. So she'd call up people and say, hey, long time no here. How's it going? By the way, I heard you're having quarterly reports being released today. What you gonna say? And people would tell her. She'd then take that information and pass it on to people like hedge fund managers, who would then buy or sell stocks based on what she had told them. Once again, completely illegal, and she's now in jail. Gotcha. A lot of different other ones that we can talk about. One concept is should you ship your product? Okay? So, you know, an interesting situation is, let's say your company has a records retention policy. Say, keep everything for 5 years and then destroy it. Well, you know, you got busy, so you haven't actually destroyed your records. So they actually go back about 7 years. No, but you'll get to it. It won't be a big problem whatsoever. Then all of a sudden, poof, a legal document shows up on your desk and says, by the way, we're being sued. Give us all of your records in relation to this particular product. Well, your records go back 7 years. Should you give them those additional 2 years? Everyone else did a good job of getting rid of the records, but you dropped the ball. Are you on the hook to provide 7 years of records, or should you only provide 2? Good question. Your ethical rules from the NSPE gives you some guidance here, okay? You don't want to do anything that's deceptive, okay? You want to do the right thing. You can get guidance from the Code of Ethics. Ernest Lieb was the guy who was in charge of Mercedes USA. Pretty good guy, very successful, made the company do good things. Unfortunately, he viewed the company's expense account as his own personal wallet. He used it to do all sorts of fantastic things, including building a house. If you're in that same situation, don't do that. Interesting other cases show up. So we get back to our ethical framework. Okay? We realize we have to recognize an ethical issue. We realize we have to get the facts. We realize we have to evaluate alternative actions. And we realize we have to make a decision and test it. There's one more step. You have to take action. So you actually have to go ahead and implement your decision. You have to understand how your decision can be implemented with the greatest care and the concern for everybody that your decision is going to impact. Now, as engineers, we fully understand that every ethical decision that we make is actually really a test case. So when you make your decision and when you implement it, the next thing that you need to do is you need to study what happens. The question that you're trying to answer is, how did my decision turn out? Was it the result that I anticipated? Okay? What have you learned from the opportunity to make this decision and from the ramifications of what happened? The only way we get better is when we make decisions. So there you have it. It's our ethical framework. There's really 5 points to it, right? Recognize an issue as being an ethical issue. Get the facts so you can make a good decision. Evaluate your alternative actions. Make sure you know exactly what your opportunities are. Finally, and perhaps maybe one of the most difficult things, actually make a decision and then test it out. Ask people how they're going to feel about it when you make that decision. Final step, act and then reflect on the outcome. We should be constantly growing. We should be evolving and becoming better ethical decision makers with every single decision that we make. My final thought for you today is for you to remember, you do not look good when you're wearing handcuffs. You probably don't look good in orange either, for that matter. So when you're faced with an opportunity to make an ethical decision, please remember the framework that we've put together. Understand that the decision is always yours to make. I'm sure that you know the right thing to do. You just have to be strong enough to choose it. Thank you.